Jazakallah khair, everybody, for coming to this halaqah. And just apologize. Actually, let me just fix this setting. Give me 1 second. Yeah, so Jazakallah khair for coming to this halaqah. And just apologize for the technical issues in regards to the projector, but inshallah, we'll have it set up next time. But I mean, you're all. Yeah, I'll mention that. So hope you guys all have access to the slides, and if you are having issues, then we'll be putting it on YouTube. But inshallah, if you don't have access, if you can't see the slides, the lecture itself should suffice, but the slides will help. So Maghrib is in like about half an hour less. So we're gonna have to break for Maghrib mid-lecture. We're gonna pray, and then we'll continue with the lecture. So that's the way we'll do it for today. And to get into the topic, I was discussing with Brother Ilyas throughout the summer what topics to discuss for this year in regards to topics related to Islam. And we came up with the idea of the proofs of Islam, which I thought was a very important topic, and it's something that I gave previously at some other places. And the idea behind this lecture series is we're going to be discussing the fundamental beliefs of every single Muslim, which is the belief in Allah, the belief in the Prophet ﷺ, and the belief in the Quran, that the Quran is the word of Allah. And of course, there's other beliefs, that the Arkan al-Iman are 6, but if you believe in these 3, the others follow logically. And it's a very important topic because of the times that we're living in, the rise of Islamophobia, the attacks on Islam, the rise of atheism. Many people are not equipped with the tools to understand how firmly grounded our religion is in terms of the truth and its veracity. That when you study the foundations of our beliefs and the miracles related to Islam, you can't help but be amazed by the different ways Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows the truth of Islam. And this is something that many Muslims, they take for granted and they don't study it because, they perhaps grow up in Muslim environments. And unfortunately, what happens sometimes is we get exposed to doubts because of the times we're living in, and they don't know how to deal with those doubts. And then that affects their understanding of Islam. And that's why the scholars mention there are 2 types of ways that shaitan will lead somebody astray. 2 main ways. Any idea what they are? So there's something even further. Why would a person disobey Allah? 2 things. Shahawat, desires, and shubuhat, doubts. Right? So this series, inshallah, is going to be dealing with the aspect of doubts. Right? And we're not going to, just to be clear, we're not going to go over every single doubt because, people bombard you with there's always an issue that they want to attack Islam with. But we're going to be talking about the foundations of our belief to show that it is firmly grounded. And when you firmly believe in Allah and that the Prophet is his messenger and that the Quran is the word of Allah, then if any doubts come, you'll know how to handle it because this religion is based on truth. The way we're going to approach this topic, and by the way, so on the slides, as you guys can see, there's 4 parts mentioned: belief in Allah, belief in the Prophet, belief in the Quran, belief in the hereafter. The last section, we won't be doing it. This is a 3-part series. I did it in the previous times, but for this sake of this course or these series, I won't do it. But it logically follows. If you believe in Allah, you believe in the Prophet, and you believe in the Quran, you're going to believe whatever the message is in the Quran, whatever the Prophet says, so you're going to believe in the hereafter. But this is something I discussed in previous times I gave this lecture, but we won't do it for this series. Now, what's the approach to this series? So, of course, I'm going to be looking into the Quran and Hadith, but I'm going to be taking an interdisciplinary approach. What does that mean, interdisciplinary? That I'm going to be discussing various fields of knowledge that a person can look into and see how researchers have shown the veracity of Islam through those various fields. So for example, we'll be looking into philosophy, we'll be looking into comparative religion, we'll be looking into history, science, linguistics, many different fields. And the reason I took that approach is one of the things that amazes me personally is there are multiple ways that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will show people the truth of Islam. And this is from the mercy of Allah because people think differently. They have different perspectives. Some people will look at the Quran and be amazed by its linguistic beauty, and that will cause them to believe in Islam. Some people are into the science. Some people just have that experiential feeling that this is something, and they like to be around Muslims. Everybody has a different thing that draws them towards Islam and towards the truth. And when you study, and you see that there's various ways that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows the veracity of this religion, you can't help but be amazed. You can't help but be amazed. Now, since I'm taking this approach, there's going to be some limitations. One, I'm going to be touching on multiple different angles, but I'm only going to be able to touch on them very briefly. So it's like intro level in that sense, because I can't get into a full out like detailed discussion, because some of the subtopics I'm going to be talking about, people have done years of study and PhDs on the subtopics that I'm going to be mentioning to you guys. So in a 3-part series, you're not going to get everything, right? And also, because I'm going to be covering various fields, I can't claim to be an expert in all these fields, right? Like I'm not like an expert on comparative religion, philosophy, linguistics. Like I don't have all that. But I'm going to be looking at what experts in those fields have said and conveying it to you guys. And then, if you guys are interested, at the end of every lecture, I'll be mentioning some books that are resources that you guys can go to study it further. And the last thing I'll mention about this particular approach is some fields that I'll be mentioning, some research I'll be mentioning is research that's evolving. So it could be that, I'm mentioning this as the research, but then maybe the research will change later on for certain things. This is in particular for like when you talk about archaeology, history, science, those type of things. But other things will be less evolving. We discuss, for example, the philosophical discussions of the proof of God. So to start off with, as you all are aware, we're living in a time where there's a growing doubt in the belief in Allah, the belief in God, right? In particular in the Western world, right? Atheism is on the rise. More and more people dissociate themselves from a religion. And in particular, with the constant attack on Islam, there are Muslims who get affected by this as well. And, growing amount of people have doubts in, the religion, in Islam, and in God. But at the same time, if you see, there's also a growing amount of people that are entering into this faith, right? It's quite amazing that the more Islam is attacked, the more people end up entering into Islam. It's quite fascinating, that phenomenon, despite the fact, as I always mention, if you look at the dawah efforts of Muslims, it's pretty weak. It's not that strong. But despite that, Islam is still growing, right? So today we're going to be focused on the proofs of the existence of Allah, the proof of God. And to start off with, we have to understand one thing, that throughout human history, the belief in God has always been, or a higher being has always been the norm. Atheism has always been an aberration and a very small minority of humanity throughout history. Now in our times, it's growing. It's still a minority, but it's growing, right? But throughout history, it's been a minority, and we're going to actually expand on some of those concepts, why it's a minority. And of course, it's because, the belief in Allah is so evident a truth throughout human history. The belief in God is something that's embedded within human beings. So the approach we're going to take, we're going to mention primarily 4 approaches, which can be broken down into 2 categories. You have what's the researchers, the scholars call non-reflective approach. So the non-reflective approach is you're not using logic or philosophy, but you're looking at certain elements and ways of knowing that are not restricted to For example, systematic reasoning and debate. And we're going to be looking at the intuitive proof of Allah, which is related to the fitrah, experiential knowledge. So that's one. And then we're going to look at reflective. This is what most people sometimes think of when they talk about the proofs of Allah. They think about it in terms of arguments, right? In particular, people who are versed in philosophy think about it in relation to systematic arguments connected with Greek logic, right? And here you have kind of two approaches, cosmological and teleological. There are other approaches, but these are kind of what we're going to discuss. One thing actually I forgot to mention about this interdisciplinary approach. Since I'm going to be mentioning multiple ways, you might feel one way is more convincing than other. You might feel one way is weak, and that's fine. I'm not claiming that every single approach is like a strong approach. And that will be based on your inclination, your understanding, etc., right? So that's perfectly fine. But the point is that when you look at it in its totality, all the different approaches, it's very strong proof that there are multiple ways in showing the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To start off with the idea of the intuitive proof. Now, to start off with, the Quran mentions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, before we came into this world, before every human being came, he made a covenant with all humanity. And he asked, in a existence that we existed prior to coming to here, he asked insan, alastu bi rabbikum, am I not your Lord? And we said, qalu bala shahidna. That all of our humanity said, certainly you are, we bear witness. And this ayah of the Quran highlights a very important thing about human psychology, that intrinsic to the human being is the belief in God. That when we're born, we're not born with what's called tabula rasa, which is a blank slate, that we don't have any beliefs. We have inside of us this inclination to believe in Allah. It's embedded within us. This is a metaphysical reality. And it's related to the concept of fitrah. You guys heard the concept of fitrah, right? Fitrah. The Prophet ﷺ said that no child is born, but he is upon the fitrah, the natural instinct. But then his parents make him a Jew, Christian, imagine. That everybody is born upon this natural state. And what is that natural state? That natural state allows a person to recognize Allah. That's one of the aspects of the fitrah. But then society and person's experiences change that. But if the fitrah is not corrupted, then a person will naturally believe in Allah, right? And some scholars, so there's a whole debate amongst Muslim theologians and scholars about the status of logical proofs for the existence of God in Islam. There's a whole discussion, like, what level do you need them? Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn al-Qayyum, they had this approach, and they were giant scholars of our history, right? They had this approach that one of the strongest faculties to know Allah is the fitrah itself. And the fitrah is higher epistemologically, so like in terms of knowing, having knowledge, than even the intellect, what we would call, the rational faculty, right? And so Ibn al-Qayyim, he has this phrase, which, it's a bit like mind-boggling, but he says, how can the proof for God be valid if his existence is more obvious than the supposed proof? So it's a bit like, I don't know, it takes time to like, did you guys get it or no, it's like kind of, he's saying that the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so evident that whatever proofs you try to come up with it, because proofs are in essence are what? Our human attempt, the human intellect to come up with reasons, but our intellect is limited. But the existence of Allah is so obvious that it doesn't necessarily need to be based on proofs, which is weaker, right? To give you kind of a break on the thing, imagine your whole life, you're seeing the sun before your eyes, right? And you're feeling its heat. And then somebody comes who was born blind, say, I don't believe in the sun. I never saw the sun. the first reaction is you're like, give me proof that the sun exists. First reaction is you'll probably be like you won't be able to explain it to them, but it's so obvious, right? And then later you're gonna maybe have to explain it to them because they can't see it, so you have to explain it, etc. They're not negating logical proofs, but they're saying that a faith doesn't need to be reliant on this. So somebody, for example, who didn't study philosophy and logic, that doesn't mean their faith is any weaker. In fact, their faith can be much stronger than somebody who, like, does a PhD in philosophy or whatever. So that's one thing. And there's a very famous incident of Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi. Have anybody heard of Fakhruddin al-Razi? Very famous Muslim thinker, theologian, who was like very brilliant, very into philosophy, all that. His tafsir, he wrote a tafsir of the Quran, which is like very hard to understand, right? But anyway, so then one day he was traveling and the people gathered around him because he was very well known for being very intelligent. And there was this old lady who said, what are you guys crowded for? Would you guys? And they said, don't you know Imam Razi is coming? She's like, who's Imam Razi? He said, he is the person who found 100 proofs of the existence of God. And then she responded, 100 proofs? Then there must have been 100 doubts. She's like, what proofs? I don't need any proofs. And Imam Razi famously said, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give me the faith of this old woman. SubhanAllah, very, very beautiful. And we probably experience this in our lives too. Maybe like our grandparents, or, you go to a village or somewhere and you meet somebody who, doesn't necessarily have a lot of formal education, but their faith is something that's very strong. You see it, in the way they live. So that's one important thing to understand, that it's not that this person needs to study all the, arguments for this and God to believe. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put it inside of us, it's natural to us. And that's why the scholars mentioned the different logical proofs are there to uncover what is already inside of us, right? They're like as supplementary proof. So the idea that there is something inside of us that causes us to believe in Allah, that causes us to recognize a higher being. Interesting enough, recent research in the field of cognitive science has shown that there is something hardwired within the human being that causes him to believe in God or a higher being. This is something hardwired into the human being, right? It's very interesting that this is something embedded inside of us, because this is through the research of cognitive science, right? There's something inside of us that causes us to believe in a higher being. And Islam says that you have a fitrah. So it seems to align with the Islamic worldview that we have something inside of us that causes us to recognize Allah. And this understanding that we have it hardwired in us is something that has been even acknowledged by some atheists. That we have hardwired in us this propensity to believe in God. Now they'll try to explain it away and they'll say, this is, something that we got through evolution, etc. But I mean, to me, I find it hard to believe that why would we have something embedded inside of us to believe in a delusion? How does that fit in terms of benefit us in terms of our evolutionary? And they'll come up with ways of trying to explain it away. And this is something that, as you're going to discuss this, the different proofs of Allah, one thing to understand is ultimately guidance comes from Allah. You could give a person 100 proofs, but guidance is from the heart. So a person can reject even 100 proofs. That's why the Quran even mentions that there are people who, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was to show them the signs, they would still say, okay, we don't believe in our eyes, right? So as I mentioned, there has been research on this idea that human beings are hardwired to believe in Allah. One research, for example, showed by this researcher, Oliver Petrovich, that it was shown that preschoolers were 7 times more likely to say that God created them than another human, than something else. And that belief in God seems to be natural to human beings, whereas denial of God, so atheism, seems to be an acquired position, meaning you have to be taught to deny God, but the belief in God is something natural to human being. And there's a book about this by Just Barrett, who is a Christian, and he said the same thing, that there's something hardwired in the human being to believe in God. Now, this is, we're discussing it now from, we just mentioned some research in terms of behavioral science, cognitive science, sorry. One thing that for me personally, I find very fascinating about this concept of fitra is when you look into the history of humanity and you look into the history of religious traditions, you will find that throughout every civilization history, the belief in a higher being is always there. Now, one thing I want to mention, somebody put something in the chat. I think, to see, what was it? We can't hear, is that normal? I think that's been resolved. Yeah, so belief in God is, you find it in every civilization, every culture. And it's interesting because starting with the 19th century, Western academia, they developed different fields to study different civilizations, such as anthropology, sociology, comparative religion. Not that they developed, like it was in, like Muslims have these fields too, but they developed it in a particular way. And when it came to the concept of religion, because they were influenced by philosophical naturalism and social Darwinism, they came up with the model that the belief in God was something that came later, belief in one God. Because in their mind, all this is basically just fake. It's just from humans' mind. So they argue that that basically you have human beings at one point, we believe in magic, and then animism, and then polytheism, and then later it became henotheism, and then it eventually came to belief in one God. And now we evolved so we could just leave the whole concept of God. That was kind of the idea behind it. And that might still be existing right now in Western academic study of religion. I don't know. And there's a lot of flaws with their research, but this was something that is dominant in Western academia when it comes to the study of religion. However, one interesting thing that came up in this type of field within Western academia is there was a man by the name of Wilhelm Schmidt. He was, sorry, it's time for Maghrib? Okay. Okay, let me just finish the thought, and then we'll go pay Maghrib. So Wilhelm Schmidt, he was a Catholic priest he died in 1954. And he lived during this time where this idea of trying to project religion as man-made and that the idea of God come later was very prevalent in Western academia. However, he looked into the research, and he researched kind of the different cultures that were studied by Western anthropologists and researchers. And he wrote a book that took him almost 40 years to write in German, called The Origin of the Idea of God. 12 volumes, 11,000 pages. He said that this idea that the idea of God came later is completely false. The original religion and belief of all human beings is the belief in one God. And the idea of having other gods and all this came later. The original religion is to believe in one God. This is really fascinating for me personally. And I think it would be a really interesting project for like some university in the Muslim world, maybe in like Turkey, to have like a department, a project of research just on this work for researchers to research it, evaluate it, and to translate it. It hasn't been translated, right? But he came, 11,000 pages showing how the original belief of human beings was the belief in one God. And not only did human beings believe in one God, but they also universally accepted certain attributes of God. One, that God was eternal, that he was all-knowing, that he was the most merciful, that he was a giver of moral law, that he gave some type of law, and he punishes and he rewards based on how you act according to that law, that he's all-powerful and he's the creator of everything. And another interesting thing is all cultures, he calls them primitive peoples, which is not like this is during his time where, Western colonialism, they had certain terms. But he's talking about like tribal people and this and that. They all had a concept of a hereafter. So it's very, for me personally, fascinating, this type of thing, because it fits in line with the concept of fitrah, and also the fact that the Quran says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent prophets to every single nation, right? So basically, embedded in the human being is to believe in Allah. But as I mentioned, the fitrah gets clouded, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends prophets to remind you there's only one Allah that you have to worship. So every nation, like in the Quran mentions clearly the Jews and Christians, but there are others that the Quran doesn't mention, but it says that every nation had. And I think from there, okay, so let me just finish this thought and then we'll break. So there's many examples of this, which we won't have time to get into, but if you look into, different tribal societies in, Australia, in the North America, there's this constant report of a belief in a higher being, constant report. And you'll find this throughout. Interesting enough, even in Chinese civilization, when we think of Chinese civilization, sometimes we think it's atheistic, and probably in recent times because of the effects of communism, but you'll find the concept of God in Chinese literature as well, ancient Chinese literature. So the concept of Shangdi, which is, some researchers say was a reference to God, essentially. So we're going to break now because it's Maghrib, and then we'll come back, inshallah. So yeah. So people on Zoom will come back in, I guess, like 10 minutes. Yeah. Inshallah, we'll pray here. Do I pause the recording or no? No need. I think we can just there's a way to pause, stop recording, pause. Yeah. So okay, so we'll resume. Yeah, okay. So I want to do activity actually. So I mentioned how, throughout human societies, every culture, every civilization, there's an indication that they believed in a higher being. And that, the idea of them having, believing in multiple gods is a later development, like degeneration from the original belief in God. So I have this in front. It's from a religious text. And I want you guys to tell me what scripture you think it's from. So the first, it's parts of, like, a line from a religious text. Describes a being that is one without a second. And he is without progenitor. It's like a fancy word for like without, like somebody to give him birth, or controller. Nothing can control him. What scripture do you think this is from? And I guess the people like who are not here can just put it in the chat. Any idea? There's something in the chat here. Give you a hint? At the end, can you ask Ustad if you can see? Give you a hint. It's not like a culture that you would normally associate with monotheism. I don't know if that's the Upanishad. The Upanishads, which is basically sacred texts coming from India that date from the 6th to 4th century, these particular Upanishads. So you'll find within Hindu scriptures the idea of monotheism there. You will find it. Now you'll find polytheism there too. So it's not like like some Hindu would be like, well, you're just taking, like the Islamic understanding is that belief in God is the original belief of every human being. And the prophets were sent to tell people, and then there was revelation, but then those revelations got changed. So it fits perfectly in line. Like if you find things that coincide with Islam, but then you find things that don't. But the point is that you will find monotheistic message within Hindu scriptures, Upanishads. And in fact, interestingly, this idea that one without a second, and then the idea that he has nobody that gave him birth, and no Lord above him, it's somewhat similar to Surah Ikhlas, وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ, that there's no equivalent to him, لَمْ يَلِدْ وَلَمْ يُولَدْ. And you'll find these parallels like a lot in when you look at Islam in relation to other scriptures. Let's do another exercise. I'm going to read you out some scripture, and I want you to tell me what you think of in terms of the names of Allah. What name comes to mind? Before the universe was born, there was something in the chaos of the heavens. And you can say in Arabic and English. Any idea? Oh, okay. Yeah, perfect. I will. Somebody mentioned in the chat. Al-awwal, exactly. Al-awwal. And then it stands alone and empty, solitary, and unchanging. Okay, now the part that I put under slide. It is ever present, secure. Oh yeah, that's good. Anything else? Let me go back to the chat. It was Al-Hayy, yeah. Al-Zahir, As-Salam. That's what came to my mind when I. The next, and somebody put something else in the chat. Al-Baqi, yeah. Okay. Next. He may be regarded as a mother of the universe. Now, of course, this wouldn't be like the idea of mother of the universe, but when you look at the function of a mother, she basically gives birth to a child. So she brings a child into existence and she nurtures and takes care of the child. Badiya Fatu, yeah. Anything else? Creator? Sure, yeah. Anything else? Well, yeah. Al-Muhyi, yeah. Giver of life, yeah. All those fitting. There's no like thing. It's just we're showing how these reflect names of Allah, right? Somebody put something in the Rab. Yeah, that's the one that personally stuck out to me. Rab. Because Rab linguistically is the Lord, Rabb al-Alameen, is the Lord of the worlds. And Rab linguistically also means that you nurture and you take care of your what you created. Now, what scripture is this from? Any idea? I don't think anybody will get this one. This one's harder than the first one. Yeah? No? Yeah? Oh, mashallah. You got it. If I had a word, I would give it to you, but I don't. Because I do not know its name, I call it the Tao. If I were to give it a name, I would call it great. Allahu Akbar. Humanity follows the earth follows the heaven follows the Tao only follows itself. The Tao teaching, 6th century BC. So it's very, very fascinating, right? When you study these things. And the thing is, one of the things is, like, when you have a bit of background, not like extensive in comparative religion, just a very brief, like, during my undergrad, I studied the different religious traditions. See, in the Western world, because it was dominated by materialism and philosophical naturalism and all these things, when they looked at these different religious traditions, they tried to, categorize them in certain ways that showed that religion was man-made. But when you start to look at these things and reflect on Islamic teachings, you'll see so many connections. And this is something that, like, it's a really fascinating field, I personally find. Like, one person that made it kind of popular in recent times was like Zakir Naik, right? You guys know Zakir Naik from India, right? He like quotes like scriptures from everywhere and he like debates people. But there's like a lot of research that can be done in this field. And I think it's a really good field in terms of dawah, but you would need like a research like team to do it. And you probably won't be able to do it in like a Western university. You'd have to do it in like Turkey or Qatar or somewhere, if they even have those departments. Okay, so this is the concept of fitra and this idea of basically how the belief in God is universal. Also, another thing about intuition, the Quran mentions that when human being is afflicted with difficulty, they call upon Allah. And then when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala changes their situation, they forget. And they associate partners with Allah. And you see this again cognitively, that like you hear of examples of people who are atheists, and then they go through like something crisis, right? Like there's like they're in a building and it's on fire or something, and then they actually call upon God, right? That you hear stories like this. And it's because embedded inside of us is this belief. And to deny that belief is you have to cover it up. It's not natural. And that's why it's interesting that the term in Arabic or in the Quran for somebody who rejects the truth is what? Kafir. It's also used before Islam for farmer. In fact, the Quran mentions the term for farmer, kuffar, because the kafir is the one who covers something up. A farmer takes a seed and he covers it up. And the idea is that the disbeliever, they're covering up something that's already inside of them, right? And there's a really interesting story about this guy. Anybody know who this guy is? Oh, Cat Stevens, yeah. Do you know his story, how he became Muslim? Okay. So essentially, Cat Stevens was like this really famous pop singer, I think in like the 70s, right? Like the hippie generation. So he was very famous. And one day he was basically on the beach and like the waves took him inside. So he started to drown. And he was like, he was gonna die. So he called on, he didn't believe in any, like he didn't follow any religion, he was like a hippie. And then he basically said, oh God, if you're there, if you save me, I'll follow whatever religion is most beloved to you. And then he was saved. And he basically said like it was a situation where he didn't think he was going to get out of it. And he basically, not right away, he started studying the different religious traditions, Buddhism and everything. Eventually, he became Yusuf Islam. He was a very famous convert to Islam. And he's contributed to the Muslims in the West for years and years. And he's from UK. One interesting thing also about this idea of calling upon Allah in desperate situation. There was one European traveler who, when he came to Canada and he met with the indigenous population, they mentioned that they had this, because the Quran also mentions one example, I guess, in particular, that when human beings were on a boat and they were like in the middle of the ocean, and they all hope is lost, right? They call upon Allah. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings them to shore, and then they're like, okay, they forget about Allah. What I found interesting was this particular explorer, he met some indigenous tribe in Canada, and they had this practice that when they would go on a boat and they would go in the ocean, they would say, Supreme Being, Great Spirit, sorry, you made the sea, you made us, and basically please protect us in this situation, which I thought was very interesting, but they reflected somewhat of kind of what the Quran mentions about human beings. Okay, so that's intuitive knowledge. The next is experiential knowledge. And this, somebody can argue, is like maybe like a weaker proof. Like if you're discussing with atheists, they won't be convinced. But like a person individually themselves, it can be enough. Your experiences can be enough to convince you that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, right? And there's so many people that, they're atheists or whatever, and then they experience something in their life. It's not something that they could come out like a rational argument. They experience something and they're like, God must be there, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself says that, throughout the Quran that, the remembrance of Allah causes serenity, that when you are connected with your purpose, of course, right, you will have that serenity, you'll have that peace. And when you think about it, again, if we're just like highly evolved animals, and there's nothing beyond us, Why is it that we get this feeling when we pray? I always give the example in Ramadan. What do we do in Ramadan? We fast in the day and we pray at night. We starve ourselves in the day and we deprive ourselves of sleep at night. We should be miserable. But it's the time where Muslims are the happiest, right? I mean, why? If we were just, and again, this might be like, people might say this is like a weak argument. It's just, but it's one of the arguments that like weak argument in the sense of if you're discussing with somebody, but not for the person experiencing it. And that's why the scholars speak about this concept of dhawq, taste, right? And this is something that there's a level of human knowledge which is experiential, which is not, to break this down. Imagine I have in front of you guys a Japanese mango. You guys know about Japanese mangoes? Like the most expensive mangoes in the world, like $100 for one mango. When do you guys can like buy me one? But so Japanese mango, right? And I'm like, look at this mango. It's so beautiful. Look at its color. And then I give you guys an article, read about the history of the mango. And then I cut the mango and I eat it in front of you guys. I'm like, how did the mango taste? I don't know. You just gave me information, but you didn't taste it. I tasted the mango. So I experienced something from the mango that you didn't experience. There's a difference between tasting something and just having information. And that's what experiential knowledge is. You experience Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your life. And again, there are countless examples of this. You'll find, of people experiencing. And again, people might say it's a weak argument because people might have these type of feelings in other traditions as well. But it's there. It's definitely there. And then another idea of this experiential knowledge, as I mentioned, when you have iman, when you have faith, it creates a richness in your soul that you can't explain if we're just biological organisms that don't have a soul and don't have a higher purpose, a higher being. And Prophet ﷺ said that riches is not in having a lot of wealth, but riches in the soul. And what comes to my mind is a very beautiful story about Lauren Booth. Has anybody heard of Lauren Booth? Yeah? So Lauren Booth is the sister-in-law of Tony Blair, who was the former Prime Minister of UK. She was a journalist, she was the peak of UK society. And she went to visit Gaza. This is before, many years ago. And she went during Ramadan, and she went to a house of a lady, Muslim lady, who was very poor in a refugee camp. And she had nothing. So Lauren Booth, she's there, she's not Muslim, and she was actually annoyed at the fact that she was fasting. And she said, how can your God ask you to fast? When you're done fasting, you're still going to be hungry. Because she had nothing. And she responded, this woman, she said, I fast so I can remember the poor. And she was poor, from the most poor. But she said, I fast so I can remember the poor. And this hit Lauren Booth in a way that this woman had nothing. She was from the most oppressed people in the world. And she had something that Lauren Booth, who was from the upper echelons of UK society, didn't have. And she ended up becoming Muslim. And then she became very active. She's still active in the community. This idea of experiential knowledge. Okay, so that's the non-reflective approach. And now we'll talk about the reflective approach. And I guess we'll get into it, we'll go a bit fast because we don't have that much time. It's already 7:10. And then we'll open it for questions. So the reflective approach is basically when you're using logical arguments, philosophy, those type of things. And as I mentioned, a person's faith doesn't need to be based, somebody doesn't need to know all the arguments for God to have faith in God. That it's not necessary because it's embedded inside of us to believe in Allah. And that's what the scholars mentioned, that the logical arguments that are there are meant to clarify what's already inside of us. It's already inside of us, but because of the influence of society and everything around us, our fitrah gets distorted. And there's two primary arguments. There's others that you'll find formulations within the Quran. One is the cosmological argument, the other is the theological argument. Now, I have to say one thing about this. The Quran gives very straightforward arguments that somebody living in a village who doesn't know, never studied before can understand, and somebody with a PhD in philosophy can understand, because Quran is for everybody. You have, though, like when I talk about cosmos, if you were like to Google it, you're going to find variations of these arguments created by philosophers and theologians, which are like human attempts to extrapolate and to expand on what the Quran is already mentioning in the most concise, beautiful way. They're trying to do it based on, you know, their culture and their things. It's a convoluted way. It's nothing wrong, but it's not as strong as the Quran argument, but it's there. So that's why you'll find, for example, even Christians and other people using these type of arguments. But the fundamental premise of the argument is something that anybody can understand. But again, like somebody will come and expand it and you know, try to explain it further. So that's why, for example, the cosmological argument is an argument which you'll find in other cultures, such as Greek culture, etc. So to break down, in essence, what's the cosmological argument? The Quran mentions أم خلقوا من غير شيء أم هم الخالقون أم خلقوا السماوات والأرض بل لا يوقنون. It gives a very simple question to human beings. Were they created from nothing? So the ayah says, or were they created by nothing? Or were they the creators of themselves? Or did they create the heavens and earth? Rather, they are not certain. So the Quran is coming and asking human beings, who created you? Or to big further, who created all that exists, the universe? There's three possibilities that the Quran is mentioning. Did it come from nothing? Did it create itself? Or was there a creator that created all this? Now, the idea that this universe came from nothing is logical fallacy. 0 plus 0 plus 0 equals 0. All our experience around us, all collective human experience, tells us that something has to come from something else, right? There's nothing that just pops out from nothing. We haven't experienced that in all our existence. So that logically doesn't seem to make sense, that everything just came from nothing. Did everything that exists, the universe, come into existence by itself? That also seems a bit strange, right? And it's like you asking somebody, when did your mother give birth to herself? Like, it doesn't make sense, right? And so the logical thing must be that all this was created by something, right? All of this must have come from some being, this universe, everything that existed. And to break this down further, so like, if we were to ask somebody, right, like, where did you come from? They're like, okay, well, my mother gave birth to me. Okay, well, where did she come from? Her parents. Where do they come from? Parents. Okay, where did they come from? Okay, they came from the first human beings. And where did they come from? Okay, like, let's just say you believe in evolutionary theory. So like, oh, they evolved from animals. Okay, where did those animals come from? They came from a microorganism. Where did a microorganism come from? You're going to keep going. Eventually, it has to stop at a being that was not originated from something else, that originated everything. And there's a very interesting dilemma that, you know, atheists have regarding this. And there's a really funny story about one atheist who tried to solve this dilemma, the origin of life on Earth. Have you guys heard of panspermia? No? So Francis Crick, he was an atheist, but he was a leading figure in molecular biology. In fact, he was one of the people that helped discover the structure of DNA. A very important figure. When he saw the complexity of life, he understood that this couldn't have just come about like that. It logically does not make sense. But he didn't believe in God. So he proposed a theory in the 70s. That, by the way, Richard Dawkins was like the famous atheist. He said this is a possibility, although believing in God is not a possibility, but that's not. And he called it directed panspermia, which he said that there's a possibility that life on Earth originated from another planet, from another intelligent life force, from another planet. So basically aliens created us. Now, like, even if you accept that, let's just say you accept aliens created, what problem do you have with this theory? Yeah. Exactly. Okay, where did aliens come from? It goes back to this idea which the scholars talked about, fallacy of infinite regress. Now, okay, fine, even if you said we were created by aliens, and maybe there's some like Trump or somebody was created by aliens, who knows, right? Like, no, so like even if you accept that aliens created human beings, where did they come from? The planet where they came from, how did life originate there? Eventually, it has to stop at a being that was not originated from anything else. And the fallacy of infinite regress is when you talk about cause and effect, eventually you have to stop at some being that was not caused by anything, but caused everything, right? And the example that people give, it's not my example, it's violent, so don't, is like of a sniper, right? So they give the example that if you have a sniper and he's waiting for like permission from his leader to basically use the snipe, and he says, okay, do I have permission to pull the trigger? And the leader says, wait, I have to get permission from my leader. And then he asks his permission, and he goes, not to get permission from my leader. If he keeps on going, he's never going to pull the trigger, right? And yeah, but eventually he has to stop at somebody who is the boss of everybody. That's kind of the idea of the fallacy of infinite regress, which is discussed in philosophy. It's a very funny story of Imam Abu Hanifa, and he had a debate with an atheist. So basically, Imam Abu Hanifa agreed to debating with an atheist at a particular place. So, Imam was like, I'll meet you here and we'll debate about the existence of God. So the atheist comes, and he's waiting for Imam Hanifa. Imam Hanifa said he'll come at this time, 6 o'clock, I don't know. And he's waiting. Imam Hanifa doesn't show up. He's waiting. He's still not there. Keeps waiting. He's not there. So then like, I got to leave, right? He's not coming. So when he's leaving, Imam Hanifa comes. He's like, where were you? Like, I'm sorry, I'm late. So like even that time, Muslims were late, right? They never come on time. It's like, subhanAllah, even up to our times. So he said, I'm sorry I was late. What happened was I live on the other side of the river. And I missed my ride. So I didn't know how to get to your place. But what happened was when I was on the other side of the river, a tree fell. And it broke itself into pieces and it made itself into a boat. And then I went on the boat and then it took me to your meeting. It's like, how am I supposed to do that? It's like, you think I'm crazy? A tree doesn't like make itself into a boat and then drive you here. He's like, yeah, but then you believe this whole universe came about by itself? Checkmate, right? So that's the idea of the cosmological argument. Now, the teleological argument, and I'll go through teleological argument very fast, is the idea that within the cosmos, within the universe, within the things that we see around us, there are signs clearly that somebody created all this. And you have like kind of variations of this. So for example, you even have within Christian circles, intelligent design and these type of things. The idea is that when you look at everything around us, there's clear. You don't see Allah, but his signs are everywhere. And the example that mentioned in one of the articles is like, you don't see the wind, but you see its effects on everything around you. You don't see radio waves, but you see the results of its transmission. Electrons, scientists can't see them, but believe based on their effects that they exist. You can't see gravity, like you don't see gravity physically, but you see it based on its effects. And when I initially did this lecture, it was during the height of COVID, that you can't see COVID, but it changed the whole world, right? Something that you can't see with the naked eye. And similarly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافِ اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ لَآيَةٍ لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ. In the alternation of the heaven, in the creation of the heavens and earth and alternation of day and night are signs for those who reflect. To further break down this idea of the design argument, if you see a beautiful painting and I ask you, who painted this really nice painting, you say this came about by itself. It doesn't work like that. A very beautiful painting has to have a painter. Just like a building has to have a, I say, wow, this Leacock building is very nice. Who designed it? What architect? Like, no, what happened was like millions of years ago, there was like an earthquake, a tornado, and it like formed all this concrete, and somehow the building came about with, through natural process. Like, doesn't make sense. A building needs to have a builder. Just like a computer needs to have a designer, right? Your laptop just didn't like design itself, right? So similarly, everything in the universe and its complexity has to have a creator. And this is something that was understood by Bedouins thousands of years ago. When somebody asked the Bedouin, how do you know that there's a creator of all this? And they said, the camel droppings tell me that there's a camel. Footprints testify that there's somebody walking. The sky that holds the stars, but then when you look at the sky that holds the stars, you look at the vastness of the land and the sea and the waves, how can this not all indicate that there's a creator? And there was one guy, his name is Anthony Flew. He was a famous atheist who left atheism and he believed in God because he saw there's too much complexity to existence. He called it integrated. Although he didn't accept like religion and he was like a deist, but he recognized it's impossible to deny the existence of God. There's too much complexity in existence. And there's so many examples of this. Like this picture right here is, have you guys heard of the golden ratio, the Fibonacci numbers? There's like this ratio that exists within basically creation that you can see, which is shared. So like our fingerprint has a ratio that is shared with the galaxies, that is shared with the ocean. You find this pattern throughout basically creation and the universe. And there are many like theological arguments. You should just go on and talk about it. So due to a shortness of time, I'll just mention a few. But when you reflect upon it, you can't help but be amazed. And one of the beautiful things about the Quran is it tells us to reflect upon Allah's creation. And that's why when Muslims were advanced in science, didn't cause them to become atheists. They actually were increasing in terms of their belief in Allah, and they advanced in theology as well, right? It wasn't like this, in Western Christianity, this idea was like the more you advance in science, the further you got away from religion. That wasn't the case for Muslim civilization. I mentioned some examples. For example, this planet that we're on right now, the Earth is basically this giant ball in the solar system, and there are meteorites all around us, asteroids, that are just ready to destroy us. Literally, they're just there, passing all the time. But there are forces that are protecting this planet from being destroyed. Amongst those is Jupiter. It's this giant ball that its gravitational pull pulls asteroids and comets away from the Earth so that it doesn't destroy Earth, right? And then you look at the Earth itself, it's at the perfect angle that had it been at another angle, there wouldn't have been life. It's at the perfect angle in relation to where it is and the perfect distance from the sun. Had it been a bit further, a bit closer, no life. Also, you have forces on the planet that allow for life to exist, such as the gravitational force and atmospheric pressure. Had those been different, there wouldn't have been life. Like you would have put somebody, because we're basically on a giant ball that's spinning in the universe, right? Should be just flying out, but we're not. We're here, right? And interesting enough, the human body, so the atmospheric pressure is in direct correlation to the pressure that exists in the human body to a flow blood. It's like at the perfect correlation. Had it been a bit different, again, we wouldn't be here. And then there's so many examples. Due to the shortness of time, I'll have to skip them. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, سَنُرِيهِمْ آيَاتٍ فِي الْآفَاقِ وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَهُمْ أَنَّهُ الْحَقُّ. We will show them our signs in the horizons, in themselves, until they know this is the truth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows us. That's why people say, I will believe in God if you show me a miracle. Yani, everything is a miracle when you think about it. We're on a giant ball that's just spinning, right? We shouldn't be here. We're communicating. What language is just me making sounds. Why is it that through language we can build civilization and relationships and all these things? There are signs literally all around us. And just as I mentioned, the signs in the solar system and universe, there are signs inside of us. For a big part of human history, it was thought that, we were just composed of, different elements. And then it came to, people discovered the atom. But then it was discovered that inside the atom, there's a universe inside of it. That inside the atom, there are electrons that revolve around the nucleus, just like planets evolve around the sun. We have many universes inside of us. And then, again, many examples. One interesting example is the concept of consciousness itself. So the human being, biologically, every 10 years, all our cells are dead and we have new cells. So physically, we're literally not the same being we were 10 years ago. And we have a concept of self. We have a concept that, there is a me. How does that exist? How does consciousness come about? And this is something that like nobody's been able to solve in terms of science, philosophers. They call it the hard problem of consciousness. How does 1,300 grams of nerve cells just meet, create consciousness? And there's no answer to it. If you don't believe in a higher being. And I'll conclude by mentioning one thing. I'm sure you're all aware, of the new atheist movement, people like Richard Dawkins. The new atheist movement, one of the things they did over the years was they tried to hijack science and push atheism through it. Understand that this idea that the more advanced you are in science, it's a fallacy, one, and it's certain ideologues that are trying to hijack science to show that science does not prove the existence of God, disprove the existence of God. And the more that you advance in your reflection of existence, and you're sincere in that, you can't help but believe in a higher force. Albert Einstein, very famous, we all know Albert Einstein, he himself said, he gave the example that a human being is like they come in and they see a giant library with books of all different languages. And they don't know all the languages, but they start to read and they get a bit of information. But they understand that there's this library here. There's all these information. Obviously, somebody must have wrote these books. And he says this is the reality of human being, that we see this universe, we understand that somebody must have created it. We don't understand all the laws. We understand a bit of laws. But we understand that there's something there. Albert Einstein said that, right? And again, there are many, many examples of prominent scientists who believed in a higher force. And I'll just mention one. It's a nice story. I'll conclude with this. I'll just read it out to you. It's just a story. It's not like based on Quran and Hadith, but I found it nice just to share with you. So there's a story of, and it's like a fictional story. So two babies that are inside the womb of a mother, okay? And they are having a dialogue. So one of the babies asks the other baby, do you believe in life after delivery? So the other one says, of course, there has to be something after the womb. Maybe we are here to prepare ourselves for life after delivery. So others said, that's nonsense. There's no life after delivery. What would life be like? And the other said, I don't know, but there will be more light than here. And maybe we will walk with our legs and eat from our mouths. The other said, that's crazy. Walking is impossible. Eating with our mouths, ridiculous. We have an umbilical cord. That gives us all our food. And life after delivery is not possible because the umbilical cord is too short. So the other baby said, I think there's something, and maybe it'll be different from our life here in the womb. So the other baby says, no one has ever come back from here, from the womb. Delivery is the end of life. And after delivery, there's nothing. And the other says, well, I don't know about that, but I'm sure that after delivery, we'll see mother and she'll take care of us. So the other baby said, do you believe in mother? Where is she now? The other baby said, she's all around us, is in her that we live. Without her, it would be not this world. I said, I don't see mother. It's only logical she doesn't exist. And the other baby said, sometimes when you're silent, you can hear her. You can perceive her. I believe there's a reality after delivery, and we are here to prepare ourselves for that reality when it comes. I've personally found the story very beautiful. And that's the conclusion. Last thing I'll mention is anybody interested in further on this topic, in particular to the concept of God and the belief in God. Al-Balagh Academy, it's an institute in the UK. They have cutting edge courses on like hot topics, and they actually recently launched like a diploma on Islam and atheism. So that's an interesting resource. Hamza, I don't want to say his last name properly, Zortzis. He has his book, Divine Reality. He's like an expert, amazing. And the book is, you could get it free. But even his lectures, he's an expert when it comes to dealing with atheism. He's actually a convert to Islam. The case for Allah's existence in the Quran and Sunnah, I largely based my framework on this article by Justin Parrott from Yaqeen Institute. It's a nice article to introduce the topic. And then the last article, Atheism and Radical Skepticism, Ibn Taymiyyah's epistemic critique. This is like advanced for people like into philosophy and all that stuff. It's also interesting. And again, so the last thing I want to mention, if you guys have any questions, concerns about anything, your studies or Islam or anything, I'm representing Mu'tamir institution. You could go to the website, book a session with me online or in person, or you could send me an email. Jazakallah khair, we'll open up for any questions.